literally, I wasn't going to drink tonight. I decided, okay, I'm going to go drink. I walked in the kitchen. My wife wasn't there. There's a glass of wine poured. She obviously poured a glass for herself. I pick it up. I was going to walk back in and just steal it from her. And literally there was a bug floating in it. So I took the bug out and put it back down, and now she can drink it.
Wait, you gave it back to her? You wouldn't drink it, but you gave it back to her?
I took the bug out. She won't know. If I didn't know there was a bug in there, I wouldn't care.
I just don't understand how you show up early and encourage us all to get here early. Then you mess around for 10 minutes and then you're like, oh, I don't have a drink.
We watched Afro Man for 10 minutes while we were waiting for Mauricio. At any time during that process, you could have gone and got a drink.
I was trying to decide if I wanted to drink. I'm trying to be healthy.
It's called drunk real estate.
AJ doesn't drink.
That's his thing though. Like, he never drinks.
You'd have to convert religions or something.
Fine. I'm going to get something to drink. You guys can wait.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate. Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, economy fans. Welcome to episode 48 of Drunk Real Estate. I am Kyle Wilson, Ashley Wilson's husband, and the gang's all together again, ready to talk economy, as Mauricio puts it. How's it going, buddy?
Are you going to me first?
Yeah, you first.
Oh my goodness. I was so thrown off again. I am doing great. I'm doing great today. As you can tell, I wore my little deep, I don't know if you guys noticed, but last week our YouTube viewership was a little down. It's because I wore not a low cut. I wore like a regular t-shirt. So I figured I'd get back. I really want to get the ratings back up on our YouTube channel. I know we do pretty well on thing. I got, AJ's there as well, showing his pecs, but so hopefully this will get the YouTube viewership up. I am back to my piscola today, but I'm going to go Peruvian style this time. A little pisco Peruvian. Caravero de Monto Verde.
What are you mixing it with this time?
Coca-Cola. It's called piscola. You don't mix piscola with something else other than cola.
Well, last time you had ginger ale, so like it was the ginger piss. I like that better.
But then it's not called a piscola. It's not called a piscola.
All right. Well, I heard from Jay that actually he might be picking up your slack and going Chilean this week. Is that what's happening?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys, you forced me to go grab a bottle. So I grabbed from the very back of the wine fridge, and I got something called Fuente de Irache. No idea where it's from. Make some reference on the back.
Who gave that to you? Who gave that to you, Jay? Who gave it to you? Is that a gift, or did you buy it somewhere?
I don't. It came from the back of my wine fridge. I don't know where it came from. I'm guessing it was a gift at some point.
Wine just shows up to his doorstep. You know, he has no idea where it comes from.
I get a lot of gifts, so if anybody ever just wants to send me wine, feel free to send me wine. I'll never turn it down.
Well, where's it from, Jay?
So on the back it references
Chilean, right? A little Santiago.
Camino de Santiago, so I'm going to assume it's Chilean, but that is literally the only reference on here to anything like that.
You know what? There's a Camino Santiago in Spain. It's actually pretty famous. The Camino Santiago.
That's Spanish on the front, isn't it? Fuente.
Well, what do they speak in Chile? What do they speak in Chile?
They speak Spanish, but but Camino Santiago is something in I'm pretty sure Camino Santiago is in Spain. Yeah, Camino Santiago is a pilgrimage anyway, it doesn't matter.
I'll let you know if it's any good. But while we're here, I didn't talk about what's going on with me. I just want to say congratulations to my oldest son. I have a high schooler now as of today. My son finished middle school today. How crazy is that? I feel like, they say it goes fast, but unbelievable. 14 and getting ready to go into high school.
Just realizing how old you are right now, Jay.
Yeah, when you get to your age and AJ's age, AJ, how old are you? How old's your oldest?
16.
Yeah. So when you get to your guys' age, it's just what happens, dude.
Yeah, AJ's not a good comparison. Those Mormons, they pop out kids like the moment that they grow hair on their balls. So like it's like he had them real early.
No lie detected.
Except AJ grew more hair on his chest.
It can't be stopped. We're so manly.
How's it going over there, AJ?
It's going good. Got my Diet Coke, clear cup.
Piscola minus the piss.
That's right.
A pisco-less cola.
if we're following Mauricio's logic, you got to move your mic out of the way a little bit because it's blocking the deep V, and we need a little bit of the chest hair there. Just point, and point it back towards yourself.
There we go.
That's better. I like that.
Strike
better.
a pose, right? So you can get it all in, take it all in, get those views up, because apparently that's what we offer on this show.
That's right. That's right. And plus, with your now that you're getting in tip top shape, you get to see more of the shape of the chest.
Right. I heard you've been winning fitness competitions. I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's been they just can't seem to keep up with me. So especially Murdoch, Ryan, he tries his best, but he just hasn't been able to cut weight or put on any muscle. Kind of sad,
Do you guys wear Speedos for the photo you guys are going to do? Is that a Speedo thing to show off all your new lines?
I don't know. They might. I have a thong, but I'm really not sure what they're going to be wearing. I assumed that was the attire, but that's my normal attire when I'm out on the beach. So
Murdoch's going all natural.
Exactly.
Murdoch's not wearing shoes at least. So
no. Yeah, and no, I'm definitely not winning, by the way. And Murdoch has like 5% body fat or something.
Well, the guy, all he does is travel around and hike everywhere. Like that's his life. Like you got a wife and kids and a business. And
well, and don't forget the other advantage is that because he's traveling around the world, the food he's eating is just less, crap in it, and so it just makes it easier for him to maintain his weight. It's not him; it's where he's at.
Don't you degrade America here, okay? We have excellent food in this country.
Ain't nothing wrong with my McDonald's.
Kyle, what are you drinking?
Or your steak at your corner place. Well, guys, I got the kids' school schedule for next year, and we have all Thanksgiving off the entire week. So I'm like, we might as well go on a cruise or something. But then it got me a little self-conscious about I got to get in beach body ready. And so I was like, what can I drink that has no carbs, no sugar? And I went into my fridge and I was like, what in there has no carbs, no sugar? And like, I look at the beers and they all have carbs, like 2.6 carbs, even for those cheap ones. And then I came across right at the end, this drink called clear rum. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's got no carbs, no sugar, only 99 calories. So it's perfect for me when I'm trying to slim down for beach body season. So
at some point they're going to start paying us.
There you go. That's what I'm drinking.
You realize that Thanksgiving, first of all, is not beach bod, and second of all, it's 6 months away. Is that how long it takes to get in shape? 6 months? Because AJ does it in like 6 weeks.
No, I just needed a reason to talk about clear again. That was the best I came up with. All right, we ready to get into this?
Let's do it.
Okay, well, we said last week that we would push off the economic update for another week and wait for some more data to come out. Mainly the CPI that came out last Wednesday. Well, it came out. So Jay, don't leave our listeners in the lurch. Why don't you catch us up on everything that's happened down the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of weeks from an economic standpoint. And I think we still don't have finality on what's going to happen. But I think the data that's come in over the last 2 weeks is definitely leading me to believe that we could be heading towards an economic slowdown. So I've got 3 messages from tonight's discussion that I want to kind of put out there. Number one, I feel like inflation is on the right track. I know we had a discussion a couple weeks ago before CPI came out that there was a concern inflation could be sticky and could increase. I know Mauricio thinks that inflation is probably going to come back pretty hard. But if you look at the data right now, as of last week, I'm a lot less worried than I was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, given the current data. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with CPI, with inflation that came out for April last week. So number one, CPI dropped for the year 3.5 to 3.4. We saw a 0.3 reading for the month. 0.3 reading for the month is not great. I mean, if you multiply that by 12, that's equivalent to 3.6% per year. And 3.6% per year is high. I mean, we want to be closer to 2%. So that monthly number isn't necessarily reassuring, but let's talk about where that number comes from. There are a couple big things that were in that number. Number one, gasoline. Gasoline was up huge last month, 2.8% for the month, which if you multiply it by 12, that's something like 35% up for gasoline. So that was a huge contributor to CPI for last month. And the second one was shelter. So this thing we talk about, this owner equivalent rents, which is essentially BLS calls homeowners and say, hey, if you rented your house today, what would you rent your house for? And people give their best answer. And so if you look at gasoline and shelter cost as a percentage of CPI, it consisted of basically, what was it? 70% of CPI. I think it was 70%. Yeah, 70% of CPI growth last month was gasoline and shelter. So if you would have gotten rid of gasoline and shelter, if you look at the core number actually dropped from 3.8 to 3.6 for the year because gasoline energy is not part of it. And so core CPI actually came in a little bit less than expected. But if you take out shelter and gasoline, what we see is that CPI inflation is pretty much where we want it to be. Now, you could say you can't just take things out. But I think if you're going to take any two things out, gas and shelter are two good things to think. They aren't necessarily economics related. So gasoline, a lot of the prices of gasoline are one, they're seasonal, they're cyclical, and they're driven by more geopolitical type issues. They're not necessarily driven by demand in the economy. And in fact, if you look at gasoline over the last couple months, we've seen the weakest demand for gas than we've seen since COVID. So gas demand is down, even though prices are up. And so again, it's not necessarily a good economic correlation, supply and demand, where there's a lot of demand, there's always going to be high prices and vice versa. Obviously, that's a big part of it. But in this case, we're seeing very weak demand, but high prices, again, because of geopolitical stuff. So if you discount gasoline, and then on the shelter side, do any of us, we've talked about this, do any of us really believe that the cost of rent and shelter is going up right now? It's high. We all agree on that. But I don't think any of us who are in the industry really think that we're seeing tremendous inflation in rent prices or housing values. So basically, if you take these two things that are not necessarily reliable pieces of economic data, gasoline and shelter, what we see is that actually inflation is pretty much right where we want it to be. And it's definitely been dropping over the last year. So does that mean that like we're out of the woods on inflation? Not necessarily. So I'm going to jump over to another topic in a second, but I do want to point out that I don't necessarily think inflation is that boogeyman that everybody is thinking it might be. And I don't necessarily think it's as big of a risk in the near term as some of us were thinking, including me, even just 2 weeks ago when we had the episode on stagflation and I was really worried about inflation. Seeing these CPI numbers from last week, I'm feeling a lot better. That said,
before you go on to the next point, though, I mean, when you say we're right where we want to be, I mean, did we move or did the Fed move the number? I mean, I thought we always talked about a 2% target for everything. We're at 3.6, at least if you annualize the last number. And I'm looking at the chart of inflation, and we're basically where we were a year ago, like June of 2023. Inflation for the last 12 months was 3%.
Yeah, but if you look at the Fed's predictions that they made at the beginning of the year, first of all, they did it off of PCE, core PCE, and they had us at 2.6 in December, like at the end of the year. And we're already at what, 2.8, 2.7? So like, if you talk about right where we want to be, like we're not, like we could hit that next month.
Yeah, because in June, like if you look at the trailing 12, we were at 3% in June. Then we've been basically going up. Now we're at, like I said, 3.4 in April. Now we're at 3.6. It's like we made all this progress, and I think that's the concern the Fed has. And I've been hearing a ton of Fed board members come out over the last couple of weeks and just basically reiterating this point is that, look, when it got all the way up to 9 point whatever it was, 9.1 in June of 2022, from June of 2022 to June of 2023, we made humongous progress going from 9 to 3. But over the last 12 months, it's just been like just hovering over 3 and starting to creep up. And I think that's one of the reasons you're hearing the Fed now come out and say, hey, we've still got some work to do. And maybe, lowering interest rates is not really at the top of our list right now.
But again, when I say I think we're where we want to be, again, if you subtract out gasoline and shelter, we're somewhere around 1% annually.
And we've already established that shelter is bullshit. So
and I would say shelter is actually very low at this point. And gasoline, okay, maybe gasoline is higher than it should be, but 2.8%, given the weak demand, isn't a number that resonates with me. So I think we are probably, again, if you take reasonable numbers for shelter and gasoline, we're probably right somewhere between 1% and 2% annualized, which is right where we want to be. Now, that could change next month. It could change over the next 6 months, but that's been kind of the trailing data for the last couple of months, that when you subtract those two things out, and again, I don't think those are necessarily as economic supply and demand driven as some other things on the list of bag of items on CPI. I think we're in better shape than I thought. Now, I am going to go and I'm going to now dispute that point with the next piece of data. So we did see something else last week, which was we got a reading for import prices. So the cost of things that we're importing, and unfortunately, import prices were up 0.9% for the month. So basically the equivalent of about 10% per year versus what was expected at about 0.3% per month. And that number is concerning because that number trended down for about a year and a half between 22 and 2023. But over the last few months, that number is starting to trend up, which is part of that's going to be related to gasoline prices because we actually have to transport that stuff. Other parts of it are going to be related to the fact that Biden just implemented tariffs on Chinese goods, a number of Chinese goods. That's going to impact it. But then the thing that I'm really concerned about, the thing we have no control over, is the fact that it's seeming like the cost of labor in China and maybe other parts of the world is going through the roof. And so they're not able to manufacture items nearly as cheaply as they were doing the last few years, the last few decades. And so this might be something that's more sticky, and we may see the increased price in imported goods up for the long term. And so that's obviously a significant driver of inflation because a lot of our goods, a lot of our commodities are imported. And so it's definitely something to keep our eyes on. And it's the one thing about inflation that's worrying me right now.
It's interesting. I saw somebody on that point of the cost of labor in China going up, that Mexico was starting to rival the cost of labor to China. And there's actually a lot of the Chinese manufacturers actually moving their factories and building factories in Mexico because the cost of labor in Mexico.
There's more skilled workers in Mexico.
Yeah, which seems crazy to me because I mean I know Mexican labor is cheap compared to the U.S. and most places in the world, but to be cheaper than China, that was a kind of an eye opener for me.
Yeah, the middle class is growing in China, and that's driving up labor cost.
Absolutely. A lot of young people in China don't really want to work right now. And we're seeing the same thing in the U.S. So
I was just going to say, I don't think that's exclusive to China.
So the first of the 3 points I wanted to make is I believe, and it's not necessarily a universal belief. I know a lot of people are more concerned than I am. But my looking at the data, I'm not as concerned about inflation right now as I was a week or two ago. Obviously, we'll see what the next couple of readings have in store, but I think things are on the right track. Second message I want to send tonight is it's looking like demand in general, consumer demand, business demand, is dropping significantly. I know we had a high PPI reading, and PPI measures basically the price of wholesale manufacturing items when manufacturers buy raw materials. That's the measure of how much they're paying. And that went up a little bit. So they're paying a little bit more, but we're seeing a whole lot of softening in other aspects of consumer demand. So retail sales was 0%. So retail sales didn't go up at all last month. It was expected to go up about 5% annually, but we saw no increase. We saw manufacturing go down. We saw industrial production go down. We saw builder sentiment down for the first time in a while. We saw business inventories negative. And then if you look at just the overall, there's an organization called the Conference Board, and the Conference Board puts out this thing called its Index of Leading Indicators, where it takes all these things that we've talked about on this show, plus probably a dozen other pieces of data, synthesizes it all and says, here's where the economy is headed based on all of these pieces of data that are leading indicators. And basically that index was down 0.6 for the month. And a lot of that was driven by weakening in business orders. So overall, we're seeing a slowdown in demand as well, consumer demand. Next week, we'll see consumer sentiment numbers, but last month's consumer sentiment numbers are looking to be really, really bad. So I saw kind of a preview number of the Michigan sentiment survey, consumer sentiment survey, and it showed essentially the largest drop that we've seen in a long time. It was something like down 13% or something. And so that was a first reading, and the real number is coming out next week. But if it's anything close to that, then consumer sentiment's in the toilet as well. And so when you have inflation going down and you have consumer demand going down, the normal assumption there is we're heading into a slowing economy and maybe a recession.
So Jay, do you think there's any path that anything happening over the next month would lead them to be cutting in June?
So, I mean, I don't really know what the criteria is right now to cut. It seems to me more that the Fed is going to be looking at the numbers, the raw numbers, because they're trying to keep their actions consistent with what the media is interpreting the market to be. So I feel like the Fed is probably looking at the data the same way I am, and they're saying, okay, it's probably not as bad as we need to worry about. But at the same time, when people are still worried, they're not going to do something to really dispute that.
Well,
so
I think it has more to do with the fact that it's why would you lower interest rates when these interest rates are still getting us to the high point of our target. So the lowest we've been is the highest of their target, and that's sustained at these interest rates without collapsing the economy. So what that means then is if you drop interest rates, inflation would go obviously up because that inflation rate is being sustained at these level of interest rates. And that's the key here. So it's not like,
but they're always
hit
late
this rate,
though.
just
Like
drop it.
the thing is they're always late to act, and so they're always behind the eight ball. So they got to be thinking, oh, like if we're just waiting for something to happen, it's going to be too late. So like, what is
Well,
the
it's not
indicator?
even waiting for something to happen. It's not that they're waiting for anything to happen. The economy's, we have unemployment that's high. Business activity is still going good. Stock market's up. Real estate prices are up. Everything's going good. And inflation rate is now down more towards a manageable scenario. It's still at the high of their target, but that's all being done at interest rates at this level. So all of a sudden, if you look at that and say, all right, if it took interest rates at this level to get us to normalize, what happens if you drop interest rates? It's a cause and effect, right? So it's if we drop interest rates, we can't even, why would inflation ever stay within this realm?
But you know, like we're talking about a quarter point though, right? Like, is that really changing anything other than, to Jay's point, consumer sentiment? Like it's the only thing that a quarter point's going to do is just change how people feel about the trajectory of the economy. It's not really changing what's happening in the economy. It's not like a quarter point. Like if the Fed drops a quarter point, like that, like we're not talking about all of a sudden the Fed in June or September. I think September is the new front runner for when the first rate cut. Like when the first rate cut, they're not going to be like, okay, we're ready. We're going to drop it at 1.5%. No, they're just going to do a quarter point, and then they're going to.
But they didn't even have to cut it. They didn't even have to cut it. All they had to do was mention they were going to cut it, and inflation ticked up. That's all it took. They mentioned it, and inflation went up, and that's what scared them. That's why they pulled back. Because all they did was hint at it. They didn't even start cutting, and everything went boom and popped in the fall of last year.
I think that might have been a coincidence. And the analogy I'm going to use, and I know Mauricio won't get this because he lives in Southern California, but you guys will get it. Driving in the snow or driving on ice, and like you're skidding and you turn the wheel really quick and the car doesn't get traction, doesn't start to turn. And at some point, the car starts to get traction, and you realize I've overcorrected. I've turned the wheel too much, and now that I have traction, I'm going to find myself like spinning around. And I'm concerned that that's what the Fed's doing, is that they've overcorrected at that 5%, or maybe they didn't. Maybe that 5% was actually perfect, but keeping it at 5% at this point, I believe could be overcorrecting, and they won't know that until inflation and demand get traction, or the opposite, get negative traction, and things start to go down. And now we can't potentially drop rates fast enough to stave off some major economic softening.
I'm a fan of the people when they talk about real interest rates, right? Like the difference between what the current rates are and what actual inflation are, and that's kind of your spread is what the real interest rates. So like I've heard someone say that like 1.5% of real interest rates is kind of like a good, that's what we want to get to. So that would have if we're at 2% inflation, then we would have rates at 3.5%. Well, if you look at inflation keeps coming down, now not every month in the last 2 months, but as a general trajectory, it keeps coming down. That means we're still getting more restrictive every time that inflation comes down. So to me, like if you just do that quarter point and kind of keep it in lockstep of, us coming down with the inflation, that makes a lot of sense to me. And to me, that's something they can explain as happening. That's not just going to all of a sudden send the economy like, oh, party's back on.
I think one of the things though here is we're all talking about now, don't get me wrong. I really want interest rates to come down. This is for commercial real estate people and this kills our business. The problem though is when I look at it, what's the Fed's purpose? Is the Fed trying to perceive and say, okay, well, let's see. The Fed is reactionary. They are simply taking in data and saying, the economy, we will wait to show us if it can or can't. When it can't, we will adjust, right? So, of course, they're always late. They're always late. That's literally the point. They're not trying to look forward and say, okay, let's move this over here and get it that. They're literally waiting for things to happen. And they're saying when things happen,
they could if they wanted. Like their mandate is for what? Maximum employment and like a stable pricing. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's basically those two things.
Yeah, it's not interest rates. So if we are at maximum employment and stable prices right now, why would they change interest rates? That's
because
what I'm saying.
If you see the trend, like we see the trend on unemployment, it's no longer maximum. It's coming down. And if we start to see prices that we could have issues with prices, then why wouldn't they adjust and just kind of see how it goes? And then they could always raise it back up again. I guess I just don't want to see that fall off a cliff thing happen.
They don't want to just go back and forth though, because they're looking at long-term, not short-term stability. And two, unemployment, when we say maximized, we are still maximized. The unemployment rate is still historically really high. So if you
want to talk about a lagging indicator though, like typically we don't even see the unemployment rate go up until after the Fed has already started cutting. So like they're always late on that.
But that's doesn't matter though. You're right. It's late because they don't have the data. What do you expect them to say? We think that it's going to happen here, so we are going to react today when all they're doing is stability.
I want them to do the same thing we do. We look at all the other indicators and we say, okay, what's the healthy economy? Let's not just look at 2 data points. Let's just not just look at core PCE and unemployment rate. Let's look at everything else that's going on in the economy. And if we feel things are going well, let's not make it more restrictive. Let's kind of step it down slowly and try to get to that neutral rate, like slowly, so that we don't make any big shocks in either way.
So what I wanted to share was this graph, because I thought this almost looked like the opposite of the graph you just showed in terms of the 10-year yield. But you can see that we went all the way up a year ago, literally 12 months, and it was at whatever this number was up here. Here we go. We were at 9.1, and we bounced back to the bottom here at 3, but we've been like just going sideways for the last year. And that's what the Fed's been talking about. Like, hey, we haven't gone all the way back. So this idea that we keep dropping, I almost hung up again, by the way. So the idea that we're actually dropping and we're going in the right direction, that's what they've been out on all the media. They keep saying, look, inflation bounced and it bounced higher than we wanted to. It hasn't come down yet. Unemployment is still really tight. That's one of the things that they really want to get. Really, they want higher unemployment, and they haven't been able to achieve that. And I don't know, I just felt like and again, I think the Fed, as I've said many, many times before, it leads with sort of expectation policy more than anything else. So it's their job is really to get the news and the sentiment out there. And their sentiment over the last couple of weeks, if not months, has been, hey, guys, let's slow down here. I don't think we're ready for rate cuts. I think we're not there on the unemployment. We're not there on the inflation number. And then the other things that start to make me feel like the Fed is seeing some stuff in the background is, Jay, I'm surprised you didn't talk about a couple of key economic indicators. Number one was the 10-year, right? So the 10-year, and granted, it's only been a month, but the 10-year is starting to come down, which means there's a lot of demand for these quote unquote safe assets, which has also been correlating with, number one, a complete breakout in silver. Like, I don't know if you guys read that over the last couple of days, but silver is now above 32, which is the highest it's been since 2012. like since its last huge peak when it ran up to 50. And gold has obviously continued to break out. It's up, I think, 20% over here. So there seems to be a demand. Now, again, I know you can argue gold is all about, the economic uncertainties and the political uncertainties, but all of these safe assets, gold, silver, and treasuries, have been going up because money's been finding those safe havens. And I think there's just a concern on the underlying economy that something is brewing under there. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Fed is seeing some data that we don't have access to, or they certainly seem to be concerned based on their statements to the media.
Do you think they're concerned about a softening, not about increased inflation, though? Because that's what the 10-year is telling us. I mean, the 10-year with downward pressure is basically saying people are fleeing to the 10-year because they're concerned about, in my opinion, they're concerned about an economic softening. They're concerned about a recession. They're concerned about lower inflation over the next 10 years. So let's lock in some current 10-year treasury rates at 4.5%.
I think you guys put way too much stock into this whole demand thing for the 10-year treasury. Demand for the 10-year treasury is still like historically extremely high. Like we're not seeing no demand issues here. To me, it's just people moving based off of predictions of what the Fed's going to do, and like you watched it just at that last CPI. The last CPI report. It all of a sudden went from 4.6 down to 4.35. Like just based off of one report. That's not a demand issue. That's just people predicting and futures and things like that.
It's people moving. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's people moving around money when they're trying to figure out, where am I going to put my money? Am I going to put my money in some higher risk, not high risk, but high risk assets, higher risk assets, like some commercial real estate debt or whatever they're going to place it, or are we going to?
Or they're just moving it in between treasuries. Or they think there's an imbalance based off of that, what they think the Fed's going to do, that all of a sudden the 10-year versus the 30, or the 10-year versus the 2-year is different. It doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden pulling it out to put it in other assets. As I said, like demand for these treasuries is still super high. We have no problem with demand for our treasuries right now. People keep saying like, oh, we're supplying too many treasuries and that's going to be issues and stuff. It hasn't been. Like, it's just,
where do they put their money? This is the thing that I always come back. If you have billions of dollars and you're worried about where in the economy of the world is in peril, where do you put it? Literally, I'm like, I want to know. When people are like, well, they're worried that the United States is in struggles.
Treasuries, gold, and silver.
People used to put it in treasuries when it paid nothing. Like it was 0.15%. And now they can get 4.5%.
If you run into safety, you're not putting into gold, because gold moves. Gold goes up and down. You may do that as a speculative or an investment, but you're not doing that for stability.
Okay, let me just jump to my third point, and then you guys can have your final say.
Well, you're not done yet? Man.
I'm not done. I've got one more point. And so I talked about my first message is I think inflation is actually not as bad as we thought. Second message, consumer demand is softening. Both of those things say to me that we could be heading towards a recession or just additional economic softening. And then there's the third piece, which actually concerns me given the first two pieces, and that's that Jerome Powell has basically said over the last week that what I just said he doesn't believe. Basically, he gave a speech last week, and essentially what he said was he expects inflation to come down in the next few months. He pushed back on the economists who believe that we could see additional hikes. But he did say these two quotes. One, he said, I would say my confidence in that forecast, meaning that that inflation will come down, is not as high as it was, having seen the readings in the first 3 months of this year. So basically what he's saying was he was a lot more encouraged that inflation was coming down 3 months ago than he is now. And he admitted that there's a small chance, and that was his word, small chance, that the Fed might have to raise interest rates again. And he added, quote, I don't think that it's likely based on the data that the next move we make would be a rate hike, but he did say it would be a small chance. He said, quote, I think it's more likely that we'll be in a place where we hold the policy rate where it is. So essentially he just gave the message that higher for longer. And normally, again, 2 weeks ago, higher for longer seemed reasonable to me because I thought that we were going to see more sticky inflation. But at this point, I think we may have overcorrected, or I think holding rates where they are is overcorrection. And I think higher for longer could be a mistake right now. And I think we could look back in a year and say we really should have been cutting rates back in the winter and spring of 2024.
And Kyle, you usually have the graph. I'm trying to pull it up, but I just looked at it last or maybe earlier this week that, the market was pricing in, I think like an 80% chance of unchanged interest rate on the next meeting. But then if you kept looking forward, to your point, Jay, you started to see very small amount, but now there's like a pricing in of some chance. Right. Yeah. So go to the next one. So now it's at 93% chance, and see now there's a 30. Is that right? Yeah, 35% chance, not a small chance, of actually a rate increase versus probably a 50-50. It stays. Wait. Current target is no. At some point the increase.
This is for the next meeting. There's a 93% chance that they're holding it steady. Then if you go to July,
next meeting is in June,
and then July is the meeting after, and then if you go to September is the first time where the highest likelihood is of a cut. And that's a 50% chance.
What's the one after that?
And that's literally a couple days before the election.
Yeah, and then December. I just saw, maybe it's changed in the last couple of days. I saw literally there was a small chance of a rate hike to 550 to 575, but I must have either it's already gone or maybe I misread it. But I could have sworn I saw some market pricing in of a small percent. I think it was like 3% or 5% of an actual hike, which I thought was interesting back then.
So I have a question for everybody then. When the Fed has tightened, how many times has that led to a recession?
The Fed tightening?
Yeah. So when we tighten monetary supply, how many times has that led to a recession?
I'm guessing most of the time.
I think every single time it has led to a recession.
Well, isn't it the other way around? Don't we get into an economic slowdown first?
I think there was one time I think it was already in a recession and we tightened, so that technically be, but pretty much every single time. So one of the things that I look at though is, and I've always thought this is, I don't really find arguments against it, though we're acting like the Fed needs to lower interest rates to not go into a recession. But first of all, are recessions bad? And second of all, is that of any actual real concern to the Fed? Are they trying to avoid a recession, or are they waiting for economic activity to slow down? We're talking about lowering interest rates so we can avoid a slowdown. But I guess I don't think that's what the Fed's like. I think
he's come out and he said, like, we had that whole discussion in the beginning. It was all like soft landing, hard landing, no landing. And like Fed and Powell played into that, like about how him trying to avoid a recession. He hasn't talked much about it lately because the media, I feel like, has already decided we've avoided a recession. But that was all the media was asking about. And he was adamant that he was trying to avoid it.
Oh, of course. I mean, he's not going to get up and be like, yeah, no, I'm going to plunge it into a recession. But saying that they're trying to avoid a recession with 100% knowing that tightening that needs to be done, an outcome of it, which you have to have, is a recession. So there's this idea, though, that I think has been vastly overplayed. That is this soft landing, meaning we can go through economic contractions without having the bad things that come with economic contractions. We are not seeing those bad things. So I think the Fed looks at it and says, we're not even seeing the outcome of money tightening. We are going to wait until we see these bad things. And then once we start to see it, then we reverse it, which means we're in a recession. I'm not saying it's right or not necessarily, but I am saying that I do not think that the Fed believes that you can have significant money tightening without having the negative effects of a recession. And I don't think that in any way, shape, or form that is a problem to them. I don't think they care. I think that they want to avoid things like inflation and deflation, but typical recessions that are given through the contracting of money supply by central banks, I think is a complete given and understanding by them. And that's actually, they look for when to reverse and start easing. And I don't think that they necessarily believe that they should until they start seeing these, because we've just never seen it. That's how the Fed works. That's how they do it, right? With they tighten money, we get the effects, higher unemployment, you have bankruptcies, we go into a recession, the GDP contracts, then we loosen and ease. And so I just think that this idea of a soft landing, or that they should start changing things now because we see trends or something, that's not ever been the case before. In fact, most of the time, you're right, they wait till after because I think a recession is part of it.
I don't know. I think you're giving them too much credit. I think they want to keep their jobs. They don't want to have a recession, and they're doing everything they can to avoid it. And I agree with you, though. Like, recessions aren't necessarily a bad thing. I would have preferred a recession as to what we had just witnessed over the last 18 months with them having to raise rates like astronomically so quickly. A recession would have been much better than doing that. So they dropped the ball on that one too. I just don't want to see them drop the ball in the back end. Any final comments? We move on. Moving on. By the way, I don't know if you guys saw too, what was the Bank of England that announced that the UK could possibly be under 2% inflation. So I don't know if you look at other countries as indicators or leading indicators of what the US might happen, but something to look at. Something for another day too. Why don't we talk Freddie Mac? Shall we? I don't think we've talked much about Freddie Mac, but as much as you know, Freddie Mac is one of the two government-sponsored entities that backstop the U.S. Mortgage market. They are the reason that we have access to 30-year fixed mortgages that basically no other country has access to. Well, good old Freddie has decided that U.S. homeowners need even more help, and as Bloomberg reports it, they are now seeking to back home equity loans. Geez, I can't even spit this out. So Mauricio, why don't you take over? Help us break down what's going on right now with Freddie Mac and these secondary mortgages.
Yeah, this is one of AJ's favorite things the government likes to do. And so anyway, I ended up pulling the actual rule that Freddie Mac, or the proposed rule that it came out. And I got to tell you, I got to really congratulate our buddy Jamie Dimon and all the other commercial banks that are no doubt behind this amazing move to extract some more money.
What
from
are you
the American
talking about,
consumer.
Mauricio? This is a proposed bill to save the little guy who is struggling and can't refinance their loan, right? That's the whole reason. I read the bill too, all 12 pages. Well, I skimmed it, and every single page, multiple times, put the benefit of the common consumer, because right now interest rates are so high that they aren't able to tap into their home equity.
Can I just say real quick that I love having an attorney as one of our co-hosts. The three of us jump on the show. We kind of make shit up. We kind of give our opinions for 45 minutes. And then Mauricio comes out and says, I actually printed out and read the bill. Like, he actually read something.
I like to rely on as an attorney, I like to rely on the source document. I don't want to read the article on the Wall Street Journal or this article or whatever their biased view is. I like my own biased view, and I like to put that biased view on our viewership and the rest of us. But it's not
me, Jay, and Kyle passed around a TikTok video that was really good about this.
Yeah.
And that 18-year-old seemed to have it really down. So
great dancer too.
I rely on paywalled articles and just get the headline. Maybe I get the first line or two before it stops me from reading any further, but I can generally
don't get me started on these paywalls everywhere. Jeez. All right, sorry, Mauricio, keep going here.
No, it's just as a clarity. It's not a bill, right? It's a proposed, it's really at this point a proposed rule. They're actually looking for comments, so I think we're still within the window. But usually give a 30-day.
No, it just ended, window. Mauricio. I looked up.
It just ended. Okay, I thought we were towards the end.
It just ended. It was like the 16th of May or something.
There you go. FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which oversees Freddie Mac. And I think at this point, I hope everybody kind of realizes that these government sponsors entities, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and they're basically arms of the government. There was a little bit of a unknown back in the GFC, right? 2008, 2009. The question was, if these things fail, would the government step in, AKA taxpayers step in and cover losses? And most people thought they would, but it wasn't 100% sure. And sure enough, taxpayer money bailed out these agencies back in 2008. So if anything goes wrong with this thing, if people start losing money, if Freddie Mac starts losing money, don't worry, we've got them covered with taxpayer money. But yeah, you're right. So what's happening is the little guy, not even the little guy. There's about I think CoreLogic had a stat that said at his last quarter there's about $1 trillion, 1.2 trillion. I've seen some other reports where a little bit more of equity that's quote unquote trapped, or people have in their homes in their equity in their homes. And the challenge is that usually you would, if you want to access that capital in the old days, you would just refinance your loan. You would just go in there and get completely refinance the entire loan. But as everybody knows, interest, a lot of these borrowers have really, really low interest rates. Some have a 2 handle, most have a 3. And so if you refinance the entire loan at a higher interest rate, you're not just refinancing the additional amount. You've got to refinance obviously the initial base amount at a much higher rate, which really nobody wants to do, and it kind of prohibits people from doing it. And so what Freddie Mac basically wants to do is come in and, just like these other products that, in the commercial real estate space, we have it already with the agency loans and with the initial mortgage, is they want to basically create a secondary market where they'll go in and actually buy, when a bank or an originator creates a second mortgage on your home, they'll actually go out there and create the market, guarantee that loan so that people are not afraid to give those loans. To your point, Kyle, it says no other country has 30-year mortgages. I don't think there's any private company that really wants to issue a 30-year loan. It's all because we have these government-backed loans that allow people to do that. But that's exactly what. So if this does pass, and to your point, Kyle, the comment period just ended. So they were talking about sometime this summer this was going to pass. You will be able to then fairly easily now tap into that $1 trillion plus of home equity via a second mortgage, which obviously is, I guess, theoretically, it's a good sign for borrowers because they get to tap into that equity. You would say, well, why is that a bad thing? And I think the reason that this is a bad thing, and I'll just give you the punchline, I do think it's a bad thing for a variety of different reasons. Even the ones that people think are a good thing, I think are a bad thing. I mean, allowing people to tap into money that ordinarily they wouldn't be able to tap in, and that's actually how they get their net worth. I think that, people's homes are most Americans' highest asset. That's how they get most of the net worth. But it just prevents the market from clearing. That we need this market to clear. There's been so much government intervention with other things, whether it's the stimulus, everything else pops up. It creates these unintended consequences, like the housing shortages, like inflation and the loss of purchasing power, like the higher debt, that it creates these other issues. And then they come out and say, well, let's solve those issues because now people are struggling. People can't, pay their bills. They can't sell their homes, which we kind of need people to sell their homes so that we can get a little bit more inventory out there and deal with this housing shortage. But it basically allows people to tap in there, which does what? It just gets people into more and more debt. We're already at record debt, right? So is that a good thing for most Americans to be able to just get more debt? But guess what most people are going to do with that money that they pull out? What do you think most people are going to do? Why would somebody get a second mortgage? Other than, of course, if they've lost their job and they just need it to survive.
Vacation.
Vacation, a 5-day.
Well, theoretically, though, like there will be a subset that will pay off their credit card. That's
That's exactly right. And who do you think benefits from that?
I mean, everybody except the credit card company.
People are up to their eyeballs in debt, and if they can't pay their debt, who's going to be the one that's really in trouble? Are the banks? The banks are taking losses because they can't get all of that debt they issued. What a great way to allow Americans to tap into their home equity so they can go ahead and consolidate their debts, pay off their credit card bills, pay off their car loans, all these things they can't afford. They can now tap into their home equity and actually do that. So it's going to result in more debt for the average consumer, which I don't know if anybody would argue that's good. I think it's going to lead to more and more inflation because that's, again, creating artificial demand on everything because I'll get more. If you don't pay off the debt, you're going to go buy stuff that you couldn't ordinarily buy, including food.
You're creating more liquid money, but not creating more assets. So of course that's just going to lead to inflation, right?
I can just see the graph. I was trying to think about how I could explain, but I can just see the graph where the assets of the average American that are in people's homes slowly over the next decade to 20 years to 30 years slowly transitions from their bank accounts or their asset in their balance sheet over to the balance sheet of the banks. I can just see that. And again, most people's net worth, most of their net worth is tied to their home. And that's because they're kind of forced to. It's like a forced savings plan. They buy their home, it goes up, they can't really refinance, they can't afford whatever. And so at the end of their life, they've got that asset. Now they're just going to start tapping into that and start to basically survive, right? To either pay their bills because they've lost purchasing power, they've lost their jobs, or they're going to pay down their debt. But it's just going to erode their assets and net worth. I just feel like it's just a nice way for the balance sheet of the average Americans to leave their homes, to go pay for stuff they can no longer afford thanks to inflation, thanks for all these stimmy checks that happened that are resulting in this loss in people's purchasing power, which is causing a lot of these issues. Housing affordability isn't going to work. I mean, the argument I've been making for a long time, I mean, this is why I'm partially got some energy behind this, is I've been arguing, hey, when you have the next real recession and people start losing their jobs and unemployment goes from whatever it is now to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, people are going to be forced to sell their homes, even though they have a really low interest rate. Because everybody says, well, why would anybody sell their home? They can just, they would have to pay. If you lose your job, you probably want to sell your home in order to make ends meet. Well, now they don't have to. Now they can just get another loan and survive by just getting more into debt and while they're in between jobs, or even if they just can't afford stuff in general because they're lost of their purchasing power, they can now tap in and get more debt. It's, I think, no different than handing them sort of a credit card for them to get more and more debt up to their eyeballs. And I think if anybody can agree, the last thing I think Americans as a whole need is more debt to service.
It's interesting. You know what you just described? You basically just described the dollar milkshake theory on a consumer level. Basically, the arbitrage between banks and consumers, and all the liquidity flowing from consumers to banks, to the point where banks are now flush and consumers are basically need a bailout. And for anybody that's listening that doesn't know what the dollar milkshake theory is, go back and listen to episode 44, because it was a great discussion that Mauricio led on that episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be sucking out because, right now, one of the reasons, I don't know if it's technically banks, but I know a lot of originators are hurting because the refinance numbers are just falling off the cliff, because why would you refinance a 3% mortgage when now I've got to pay, 7 or 8 or maybe even higher on the refinance? Well, boom, now it's all of a sudden originators are back in business. There's going to be an artificial marketplace and demand for these loans. Originations are going to start going through the roof. People are going to start making money. But ultimately, I do think the proposed rule mentioned a lot of beneficiaries. Obviously, the borrower was one of them. One of them I did not see at all was the banks. Of course, shocker. I would not be surprised. I didn't do enough digging to figure out.
Yeah, of course, this is led by the banks.
You've got it right. I haven't seen a single. Again, I didn't really look at too many articles. I wanted to get to the source. So I don't know if there's articles out there that are implying that or not. But I mean, I'd be shocked if banking officials weren't somehow lobbying to get.
Well, let's just break down what Freddie does, and Fannie's the same thing. First of all, if this is only proposed for Freddie, and everyone's like, oh, it's not going to be like, because it's only for Freddie loans and stuff. The moment it gets passed for Freddie, Fannie's going to pick up the slack, and they're going to do the same thing. They're basically two peas in a pod. But let's just look at it from the bank's perspective. Fannie and Freddie, like, what they do is they allow banks to basically originate loans with no risk. So the banks underwrite it for Fannie and Freddie, and they take their origination fees, they take all their fees, and then they could just flip it over to Fannie and Freddie, and they could take it off their balance sheet. Currently, right now with second mortgages, if a bank wants to do a second mortgage, they got to keep it on their balance sheet. They got to make sure this is a good one, and there's not the supply demand. They're a little bit riskier, so they're going to put real high interest rates on them, and they're not going to do very many. But if all of a sudden Fannie and Freddie are there to take every single one of them off their plate, they'll do as many as they can. As long as it checks those boxes, they're gonna do those. My camera messed up. They're gonna do those loans. So when you look at it from, okay, who's benefiting the most? You're right, the banks, because the banks are all of a sudden getting another avenue of just collecting fees with no risk. And I looked at this and I tried to see if I could take the other side of this. Because I enjoy, if you haven't noticed, I enjoy taking the other side of what the obvious position is, that this is a bad thing, and see it's a good thing. And so first of all, it will help a lot of people. There are some people who are out there hurting, high credit cards. They can get out of those. Question is, okay, how did they get in there? Are they going to be able to stay out of there? But it's tough for me to make that argument. The only other argument I have is that I don't think this is going to have as big of effect as people think it will. You can already get, as I alluded to, a second mortgage. It's a higher rate than you would be able to get this, but you can already get them. They're out there. There's other options that do the same thing. So will this make it more readily available, and will it make it easier? Yes. But I don't think it's all of a sudden people are like, oh, $3 trillion in home equity, or all of a sudden it's going to get flooded in the market. It's going to take a while, and I really don't think it's going to have that big of an effect. And I guess that's my only real argument against this being a bad thing, is it is going to help some people, and it's not going to really affect that much.
I suspect this is going to be something we look back on like in 2008 or before 2008. The banks were originating all of these subprime loans, and 2008 happens, and everybody looks back and says, well, that was obviously a bad idea. What the hell were they thinking? But nobody said it at the time. And I think it's going to be the same thing here. Everybody's going to be like, this is a great idea. Banks need to do this to provide some liquidity to consumers, to homeowners, to borrowers. Yeah, this is great. And now in 5 years, when we realize that all these banks need to be bailed out because they're losing trillions of dollars on these loans, we're going to look back and say, well, that was a ridiculous thing. Who thought that was a good idea?
I don't know. It's not like they all of a sudden like loosened the requirements or anything. Like this is, if you look at the requirements, yes, it goes up to 80% LTV. You still have like the credit requirements. You have all the same requirements, probably stricter based off of, my experience with seconds. They're usually stricter than the firsts. And so I really, as I said, I really don't think like there's going to be all of a sudden this flood of people going out and qualifying and getting like, trillions of dollars of loans out here. I just don't see it really happening.
It's restrictive, cost barriers. It's not enough. I don't think. I agree with you, Kyle. I don't think that it's going to be this massive flood.
Right. Like, is someone going to take, a couple $1,000s worth of fees to take out 20 grand of a home equity line or a home equity loan? I don't know.
The people that qualify normally aren't the ones that are going to do that.
Yeah, although they'll always adjust it, right? Like if they come out and the market and people aren't excited about whatever rates, they'll, there's nothing that prevents them from lowering their credit score. Oh, okay, let's lower it to, 580 or 550, which nobody in their right mind in the private market would do. Let's lower the interest rate artificially again, or have them be able to buy down interest. I mean, they'll make it easier and easier until they get to that point where they can do it. But to counter your point a little bit, so since we're in the countering mode, Kyle, this thing about being good in the short term, the analogy I like to give is, the free check that everybody got during COVID, the COVID stimmy checks, for example. That's, I think, such a great analogy, because it's like on the short term, everybody benefits from getting a $3,000 check from the government. Yeah, great. But now fast forward 4 or 5 years with inflation and the erosion of the purchasing power going on, that the increase in rent that you're feeling right now is dwarfs and is going to dwarf for the next decade that $3,000 benefit that you got back in 2020, 2021. Your mortgage has gone up, your food's gone up, everything's been going up, your cost of living has gone up exponentially. So yeah, in the short term, it looks, hey, great, I got a nice little stimmy check, or great, I was able to access this home equity to pay off my debts. But then you fast forward 10 years, they would have had this nice home.
But we're talking about such a small multiple. Like if you look at I think I saw a stat where it's like currently home equity loans are only like 350 billion or something. Whereas historically they was quoting pre-GFC, they were 700 billion. So like we're only talking about 350 billion at the high end. If all of a sudden we just got back to when it was crazy at the pre-GFC. So like that's not the same as trillions of dollars being printed in stimmy checks and all these things for the economy. I don't see. First of all, I don't even see that 300 billion happening. The restrictions are much higher than they were back then, and I don't see it making that big of a dent, honestly.
But the average home is at, what is it now? Is it I don't know what the average home is. Is it like in the high threes, 350, 375, or do we already cross 4? It's somewhere around there. So
it crossed 4. I think it might be just low 4s at this point.
All right, so a 10% increase. So it's like every time your property goes up 10% or inflates 10% thanks to inflation, you get an extra $40,000 in equity. You can start using your home as an ATM. You think people are not going to take advantage of that? Especially when they packaged it in such the fees you were talking about, they're not even going to see those fees. It's like when you go lease a car or something, they're like, oh, $2,000. It's just built into the purchase price of the loan of the product. You're not going to see it. All you know is you're getting a nice little loan at an interest rate, and you can solve your other problems that you have and pay rent and pay off your credit cards. Because credit card fees are what, Jay? You've been paying attention to credit card interest rates are like in the 20s or something. It's ridiculous, right? So why not take money out of your home equity through a Freddie Mac, and even if it's at 9%, and pay off my $20,000 credit card bills at 25, or my
right. But they already have that debt. Like it's like that debt's there already there. It's just getting shifted. So like it's like, to me, like those
but at a cheaper rate though, I'm paying 25% interest, and now I'm only paying 9%. And same with my car.
Right.
loan.
So to me, those people are the ones benefiting. The issue that I think you're talking about is the people who didn't have that money before, and they didn't really need it to pay off any other debt, and they're all of a sudden just going to be like opportunistic and say, "Oh, hey, like if it's there, I'm going to take it." And all of a sudden, they just have like, we're going to see the savings rate, because the savings rate is like all-time lows right now. We're going to see the savings rate just skyrocket because people are going to take all this money. It's going to go in their bank accounts and they're going to spend it on stuff. I feel happy for the people who all of a sudden have credit card debt and have this opportunity to be able to pay off that credit card debt, because credit card debt is ridiculous. It's a never ending spiral that you can't get out of, and this would be kind of a lifeline for them. But to say that there's going to be so many people who are going to be opportunistic, and that it's going to really affect the economy, I guess it's a hard sell for me.
Just to point out the obvious, by the way, if people are using that money to pay off their credit cards, who's that money going to? Who controls the credit cards? It's banks.
It's the banks. That's what I'm saying. It's like that 25%. Yeah, I mean the default rate on credit cards is not going to be zero, right? People when credit cards are at 25% and people can't afford to make the payments, they're going to start defaulting on the credit cards and they're just going to lose that money. Now they get sort of bailed out because now it's going to come from, they're going to get another loan from their home equity line, not home equity line credit, but their second mortgage, and be able to actually pay the bank off, which ordinarily they would have suffered much larger losses.
But it's interesting that they're shifting the risk now from the banks who own the credit cards, assuming they're using these home equity lines to pay off credit cards and car loans and other debt that's originated through banks. They're basically shifting the risk from those banks to Freddie Mac,
to the taxpayers,
or of course, to the taxpayers ultimately.
That's my point. Like when these things default, if somebody defaults on their credit card or their car loan, the banks suffer. If somebody defaults on their second mortgage, Freddie Mac suffers and the taxpayers bail them out.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at 2008, I mean, the banks are going to get bailed out too. So it's really 6 of one, half dozen.
Yeah, well, can we just talk about Freddie Mac for a second? We don't have to get too far into it, but Freddie Mac is a publicly traded company. And their business models, this is one of their business models, is to basically say, hey, listen, when you guys are taking mortgages from us, you're paying us too much right now. We got to figure out a way to help you guys out and pay us less. And Freddie Mac is such a weird thing where it's like government sponsored, but it's a publicly traded, like non-government company. It's such a, like, in entirety of it, it's such a weird concept that, like, whenever they release these things, I'm like, okay, wait, are they a for-profit or are they a government? I don't really know.
Well, officially, the way I've always heard them described is sort of they're a quasi-governmental agency, because obviously they're a creature of they're oversight of the FHFA. But yeah, I actually forgot that they were publicly traded. I forgot about that part, because
you can go buy them right now.
Yeah,
they're at $1.48.
Were they publicly traded in 08 when they all got bailed out in 08? Were they publicly traded? And what happened to the equity holders when that happened? I assume they got wiped out.
I don't know that. I can't say I've ever looked up Freddie Mac with an interest.
That's a separate episode.
Yeah, that's another episode we'll cover. That's a big topic.
Okay, top 10.
No, AJ, you got any final thoughts to support what I was saying?
You know what? I think exactly right. At the end of the day, in order to expand credit, you have to expand the people that can borrow it. So if you are keeping high qualifications of buyers and high costs, you will still only tap into a certain level. That is something we found out in 08. How do you increase the borrowers? You take less credit-worthy people, and those people take the money. So I do honestly wonder how much capital that this will even access in the economy. I think there's a select group of people that this may work out good. Another thing, though, that you also find is the trade. So you access capital. Well, what are you doing with it? So the cost of the access has to be less than the cost to utilize. And I think that given those conditions, it's not nearly as much. When money is obviously super cheap and it's super easy to get, the cost to access it is very limited. And the cost and what I get from it, even if it's just buying a TV, seems worth it, right? But as that cost and those barriers of access go up, it's just not nearly as much.
So the too long didn't read or too long didn't listen is, we all think it would be a net detriment to the economy, but we're not sure how much it would really affect.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to the top 10. And the top 10 centers around somebody who would get screwed if all of a sudden people had access to these loans. And that would be the predatory payday loan operators. And so I thought it would go through and I would say, okay, which states, the top 10 states with the highest predatory loan rates on average and they did a study on basically if you were to take $400 out of a payday loan, what percentage rate would you pay? And so we'll start with number 10, just because it is the great state or not so great state, depending on your opinion, of California, 460%. That's number 10.
And that's an annualized rate. Is that is that an
Annualized rate on a $400 payday loan? Annualized rate, Idaho, AJ sneaking in there, 475%. North Dakota, 521. Wisconsin, 537. Utah, 543. Nevada, 548. Mississippi, I always get Mississippi and Missouri because it's MS, 572. Delaware, 639. Now it's Missouri, 652%. And coming in number one,
Georgia.
Great state of Texas.
Ah.
662%. So, and just for reference, I know Jay would ask. So Jay, Florida is only 293%. So you're much more favorable for if someone wants to get a $400 payday loan.
I have two comments or questions, and we don't have to get into it. But number one is, how do these companies get around the usury laws? Because we're all stuck with these usury laws. We can't charge more than 10 or 15%, number one. And number two, aren't these basically secured loans because they're secured by your paycheck? Like your paycheck's coming down the road next week and you just need basically a bridge loan, and you pay it back once your paycheck comes in. You would think that it's more like a secured loan than a.
So I think answer to number one is fees, because it's only a $400 loan that they could basically charge that max interest rate plus a bunch of fees. And when it all nets, because they pay it back pretty quickly, that's how it comes to that high percentage rate.
And to answer your question, Mauricio, they get around the usury laws because most states have laws that are specific to small loans. So these payday loans can only be up to a certain amount. They're covered under different laws in most states. And so I actually knew somebody that was a lobbyist for these payday companies, and it really bothered me. But yeah, that's how they get around, because there's different laws for small loans.
I feel like you're better off just going to like a loan shark, or maybe go to a loan shark or a pawn shop. I mean, Jesus.
At least the payday lenders won't break your kneecaps.
Maybe we should set up a payday syndication, and we only charge 200%.
I'm in.
It'd be a good business model. All right. We mentioned earlier, Jay actually brought it up about paywall news sources. And I was noticing today how I was trying to find like articles just on this Freddie Mac thing. And there was very few, and most of them were behind a paywall. And I was getting super frustrated. And so I was like, okay, if I had to pick a news source, because I'm not going to pay for them all, which one would I actually pay for? And so I thought we would do an F, Marry, Kill of 3 of the top news sources for if you would want to marry it. So like you're paying for it and you're using it the rest of your life. F it. So you would pay for it and use it one time, or kill it. Like you would never go to the news source. Okay. So these 3 news sources are the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Fox News. So Jay, I'll start with you. F, Marry, Kill, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Fox News.
Well, I think it's obvious that Marry for me is Wall Street Journal, because of the 3, it's the only one that I have a subscription to. I mean, I guess you can't subscribe to Fox, but I don't watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC or OAN or any of those crappy news channels. But I actually do have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, so that's my Marry. New York Times and Fox News. I think they are both equally bad. Though I credit Fox News with kind of starting this trend of horrendous, quote unquote, journalism like 25 years ago, and kind of getting us into this downward spiral of news sources becoming more infotainment than anything. So I have a special hatred in my heart for Fox News, but they've corrupted basically all news sources on all sides, and I certainly don't think the New York Times is any better. Because of that, I'm going to have to do the kill Fox News, and I'll F the New York Times, I guess. They'll probably have one piece of data or one news story that I want at some point. So that's my F.
That's fair. Mauricio, what do you got?
Yeah, are we ever going to be able to just get a nice, clean, simple answer from Jay? Or does it always have to be like this long, drawn out explanation? And like, it's always, I'm going to
Okay.
agree.
F, marry, kill the three of you. I'm going to kill Mauricio. And I'll leave it at that.
I will agree with the Wall Street. I will marry the Wall Street Journal because I too have a subscription. And since was it last week that you guys said that since the Wall Street Journal is such a liberal leaning thing, I'm going to go with Fox News with my other one.
I thought it was the Washington Post, wasn't it? Not the Wall Street
No,
Journal.
we're talking about the Wall Street Journal. It was an article.
Yeah, you said the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, you said the Wall Street Journal is such a liberal thing, and I'm like, oh my god. So if that's liberal, then I like to balance my news. So I'll fuck news and kill the New York Times.
I'm the same as Mauricio. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, so I'm actually going. I would marry Wall Street Journal like everyone else because I do feel like it's the most center of all the news sources. But I would change. I would F Fox News. Just because I feel like in general the media is pretty left leaning, and so there's a lot of times where I see like CNN, CNBC, like all these different things. I see something pop up, and I say, let me go check out what the other side of this is. So then I'll go over to Fox News and I'll check out, okay, what's Fox News' spin on this, and then I can get center between the two of those, and then I would kill what's the next one? New York Times. I feel like their opinion pieces are just getting worse. Like they have just their normal news.
Was it today they had why photography cameras, like the racist, a whole thing on racist cameras or something? Today I was like, what is this?
Yeah, it's like when they added those opinion things, like I feel like they're just going downhill too. So I'm a little bit different, but I think in general, I guess Wall Street Journal is just the catch, boys. Like that's the number one draft pick. Great shout out to website All Sides, by the way. All Sides, if you want to go check out Media Bias. That's
told you. Awesome, huh?
So let's take this one step further. What's your go-to news source?
I actually do Reuters a lot. I feel like it's international too, and it's one of the top ones on Google News, so in their mornings I could just be like, hey Google, good morning. And oh shit, it's gonna talk to me now. But but then it just plays off the news and stuff, and Reuters is one of the ones, so I put that at the top. That's my go-to.
Mauricio?
I've never heard of this All Side. I'm just on it right now. I'm like, so it gives you like the left leaning and the middle and the right. Is that what this does?
Yeah. So if you scroll down from the main page, it rates all of the news sources, so like alphabetically.
But what it does is it rates the article, the news source, and the writer. So it'll actually rate all of them. They also rank every single one of their employees, board members' biases. You can see every person in their organization and the biases that they hold. And then they break down also language in the article. So when they rate an article, whether it's biased left or right, they'll actually rate the language that it's written and how it's written. And then you can take one subject and it'll show all of the news articles. It'll rank all of them and show whether it's left or right. And then you can also look at the writers who write it, and you can see all their articles and where they've averaged ranked on their biases.
Wow, I got to check this out because I do like to do a little bit of everything. So I literally like to see all angles because I am a believer of doing it all. So I'll check like Wall Street Journal. I do have a subscription to do that, and then if I want to look at like the conservative sort of more conservative, I just go to Zero Hedge. Like I feel Zero Hedge is pretty. If I want that perspective, I just go to Zero Hedge, and then I actually do like to go. I know this kind of sound kind of a little weird. I do like to go to just Yahoo, and the reason for that isn't because of what you think. It's just 'cause I think that's what most people read. So I like to know what most people are reading, so I can get my pulse on that. But I do like to go with these all sides. But now that I found this website, thank you guys. I'm going to start messing around with this.
Yeah, and my favorite's actually when you just go to the top and you click on news, it goes through all of the headlines and it gives you 3 articles. So it gives you the headline and then it gives you from the left, from the center, from the right. So you could like compare all of them, which it's pretty hilarious sometimes when you have like something that's a politically charged topic. And you could see like what the far left and the far right are saying, how they spin them differently. It's pretty funny. Like like if anything about Trump, first of all, is always great.
Yeah. They'll also do alerts. If something's like way out of line or something like that, they'll actually give like an alert like, hey, we need to say this if it's covered by the major ones. It's really good.
My guilty pleasure is when I'm in a hotel room or in an airplane. That
Whoa,
has,
there are kids listening to this. There are kids listening to this. Careful.
my other
I
guilty
was all by
pleasure.
myself.
My other guilty pleasure in a hotel room or in an airplane, when they have like streaming TV on the airplane, is I'll watch Fox and CNN.
Yeah, just click back and forth between
and I'll go
them.
back and forth,
Yeah.
and it's so awesome. But here's the thing: if there's somebody like sitting next to me, I'm like so conflicted, like which one is worse to be watching like in public these days? And it used to be Fox. It used to be like, I never wanted anybody to see me watching Fox News. Now it's more, I don't want people seeing me watch CNN. And so it's like, it's just funny. It's like, I'll look around and be like, okay, I'm going to size up the people. Okay. He's not going to mind CNN as much. He's not going to mind Fox. Okay.
On that note, I'm allowed to drink Bud Light again, right? By the way, Kid Rock said it was fine.
Kid Rock said it's okay.
Kid Rock said it was good.
Yeah, he said it's good.
Apparently he took a sponsorship from them and then came out and said, look, this whole thing is ridiculous. We're vilifying this company. We shouldn't be doing that. And it turned out he had taken a sponsorship that day.
A huge check. Yeah.
So, but that means it's okay, right? Because Bud Light is my preferred light beer of all those, like Miller Lite, Coors Light, whatever. So I just want to make sure like I can stop putting the koozies on it in public.
I'll allow it.
All right, good. All right. Plugs. Let's go with Mauricio. What do you got for us?
I'm going to plug a little bit different today because we just crossed 4,000 members. I've got a Facebook community called Real Estate Syndicator Community. We just passed 4,000 members. So if you're a real estate syndicator, just go to Real Estate Syndicator Community on Facebook or mauricioraul.com/FB group.
Go check it out. I never have, so I hope it's great. I'm not on Facebook though. Jay, what do you got?
I'm sitting here on all sides, and like the top story is corporate greed causing inflation. And from the left, corporate greed is the leading cause of inflation. And from the right, corporate greed is not to blame for high inflation. I love it.
You're going to have so much fun on this site, Jay. I've loved this thing ever since I actually donate to them because I love it so much.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What do I have to plug? Help me out, Kyle. What do I have to plug?
I don't know. You raising money for anything, or
I'm not.
you doing any?
I'm gonna save this one. I'll do two plugs next week.
Okay,
Good call.
as long as it's not my wife. I'm the only one who gets to plug her. AJ, what do you got?
So I am in the middle of a race. We've got our Arizona development deal. We are finalizing right now. So we are in the last rounds, wrapping it up. It's already under construction, 2 stores, Phoenix, Arizona. But anybody want to check that out, you can go to Cedar Creek Capital and email us.
How much longer are you going to be raising for this one?
We have 3 weeks, I think.
Okay, we're thinking about a new fund, and we're looking for some sponsors we know, like, and trust. And so you're certainly on that list, but I don't know if we're going to get the fund launched in
I thought you were going to ask him if you knew any.
I got some names.
I don't think we're going to get launched in 3 weeks, but keep us in mind.
There you go. Everybody go out and get a second mortgage on your home and take that money and invest it with AJ.
There you go.
Thanks, Mauricio, for setting that up for me.
Mauricio as my lawyer. Am I not allowed to say that? That's not a recommendation. Whatever I say is just ideas, and we don't recommend it.
As your business partner, I would say don't say that.
Of course not.
All right.
Use credit cards.
Speaking of business partner, I'm going to plug Jay's business partner, Ashley Wilson. Go check her out on at Bad Ash Investor on Instagram, Bad Ash Investor on YouTube. She is smarter than Jay and much better looking. So if you're following Jay, you should be following her. All right, boys. Good having you again. Our streak continues. I think it continues next week again too, right? My drink is gone. Jay's is not.
I did not get even through a whole glass of wine tonight, but that was on purpose. I'm trying to be healthy.
Mauricio's is not either. Finish that, Mauricio. Let's go. Yeah, chug. Come on. Get that pisco down.
Piscola.
Well done. All right. For everyone else, I will see you next Tuesday.